Well, good afternoon, everybody. Uh, let's start. We have a full program this afternoon, and I am very pleased to welcome you, all of you, in this workshop uh, on an issue that is quite a challenge for the gas sector, taking into account the environment that we are presently feeling it, and see that things indeed are clearly moving in a fast way, and this creates indeed a challenge for our natural gas sector. So due to that, we are here. We have two sessions today. The first session is regarding regulatory challenge for a decarbonized gas sector, and the second discussion panel is related to gas market design and infrastructure. But before that, we have to present our document, our CEER consultation document, and Markus Krug will do it. We are, my thanks also to the European Commission and Agustin for sharing their perspective and to be here in this workshop. We are witnessing an energy transition. I call it a metamorphosis. It's more than an energy transition. It's clearly a metamorphosis, and has I have silver beer, so I have I have with the sector since many time ago. I am a board member of the Portuguese NRI presently, but I was a technical member of the NRI since my last 20 years on electricity and gas issues. And even when I make my studies, well, one of my university studies was designing a prototype of a wind turbine. Imagine, it was on a lab. And now we see around, and things change a lot indeed. And I am very happy because I see that I can live in my professional life something that is really changing the energy sector, the energy vectors. And this was quite amazing some years ago. 20 years ago, we don't foresee that. And now we are discussing then in 10 years, we will face a huge change in terms of energy vectors, namely the ones depending on Brent. And this impacts on the natural gas sector, on electricity clearly. And due to that, we have to discuss indeed what is our vision for these infrastructures in natural gas sector. Because we are taking now decisions that we have to take them now, and we have to live with these investments, with these assets, because it's a capital incentive infrastructure. We have to live with them for 20 or 30 years. So we have now to do something different from what we did in the past. In the past, we took our decisions, and we take all our decisions considering that the demand will increase. And nowadays things are changing indeed. So we have to, before starting working and investing, we have to start discussing what is our vision for the future. And if we have a common vision and we achieve to have a common vision, then we will make less mistakes, less errors. We will provide an environment and natural gas sector more resilient. And this is what is about, and we are here due to that, to discuss this vision in several perspectives, of course. We have the technology perspective, we have the regulatory perspective. This is our perspective, the perspective of this workshop is in the regulatory environment. Well, the CEER Vision is well addressed to these challenges of the energy transition. In the CEER Vision, it was quite strange when we discussed it, because usually the 3Ds were not the 3Ds that were defined by the CEER members. So we cover digitalization, we cover dynamic regulation, quite unusual. And we, of course, decarbonization at least cost. But this third D, the dynamic regulation, is quite new. And why you need that? Because as things are going more faster, we have to adapt our roles, our regulatory framework, in order to avoid the regulatory barriers, in order to not incentivize this energy transition or subsidizing this energy transition, but to minimize the barriers and the obstacles that our regulatory environment or our codes may impose to this shift. This is our objective. So the 3D, the third D on the CEER strategy related to dynamic regulation was quite visionary some years ago. It was defined, I think, 2 years ago. And even our first document, that was the frog, even the name is quite interesting, future role of gas. Now I think at those times, 2 years ago, we started working them among our members. We had some difficulties to start discussing between us these issues. And now I see that, well, we did a good work. I think we start discussing it when what is needed. Now, in this workshop, we see that it was necessary indeed. And now I think it's something that it is acceptable by all of us that we have to start discussing our common vision for the future of the natural gas sector, and also for the new energy vectors that will appear. It's more than the natural gas sector. It's regarding new energy vectors. Well, regarding our document, consultation document, Marcus will summarize the main elements of the paper in a moment. And we have 3 topics in our document: regulatory challenges for renewable gases, the infrastructure investments and regulation, and adapting the gas market design to this energy transition that is just there. Also, I have to recall the Madrid Forum. In the Madrid Forum, last Madrid Forum in October, the stakeholders were asked to present to make some work by the European Commission. And the CEER was asked to consider 2 specific issues: the role of regulated entities in new services and technologies, and the potential decommissioning of gas infrastructure due to this new environment in the future. And so this consultation document also addresses these 2 topics, among others. I also have to assure to you that as CEER and ACER, we regulators are looking deeply into many of all these issues. In particular, we are working together, CEER and ACER, in order to develop a common thinking in the coming months through this consultation paper and other work. So we are keeping work together with CEER and ACER. Well, and I am very looking forward to today's discussion, to receive your comments. And of course, don't forget, the deadline to participate in this public consultation is 17 May. And now I will invite Agustin to share the European Commission's perspective on these issues. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Oude Stefan Haastra, and I'm working in the wholesale market unit of DG Energy, where until recently I was active on the electricity side, and I'm moving to the gas side, which provides me with the opportunity to present myself, as quite a few may have not seen my face yet, as this is to some extent also a different world. When it comes to the Commission perspective, I think it's first important to recall that during the last Commission we have put lots of emphasis on electricity side of the energy sector. We have been passing new targets for energy efficiency, for new targets for renewables penetration. We have set up a framework to govern this all to make sure that the targets have a good chance of being met. And we have put a lot of emphasis on revising the market design for the electricity markets in order to make sure that they really fit for the above 50% penetration, which is reasonably to be expected by 2030. So when it comes to the overall framework of the energy sector and the electricity sector in particular, we have at least set out some kind of perspective as to how we're going to do things and where we want to be by 2030. Of course, by doing this, we made sure that we had a scenario and a perspective which retained us on the path of full decarbonization by 2050. But of course, the realization is big that we have only basically set out the path until 2030. We haven't really thought very hard about the path to 2050. And we have left out for the moment anything which related to gas. And knowing that it is the case, we have also been trying to develop a more longer-term perspective, a perspective which has been presented at the occasion of the conference at Katowice, as to what the scenarios would be if we want to go to a net zero economy by 2050. And that is, of course, fueled by the public debate which is already around the gas sector, also fueled by the knowledge that we have to do something also as Commission. And anybody who has been part of this public debate has been sitting through numerous presentations where scenarios were being presented as to maybe maybe we should do this way or we should do that way, and what would be the penetration of biogases, of what will be the penetration of hydrogen, or what would be the most cost-efficient paths, and so on. But and the two conclusions maybe can be drawn on a high level from all this presentation is that whereas there's some consensus as to there's quite a lot actually there's consensus that we have to tackle also the decarbonization of the gas sector. There is very much uncertainty as to what exactly the sector will look like, what are the opportunities, what will be the carriers which will be around by 2050, and there's lots of uncertainty as to where we will land. And secondly, much of the discussion has been stayed on the level as to where it would be nice to be, and not so much at the level of how we're actually going to get there. And this is part of the work which we in DG Energy are doing, and we are trying also, of course, to engage with our stakeholders, CEER in particular, in order to make this thinking a bit more clear. So, and this is not coincidentally, of course, today, because having done all the work we have done on the previous Commission, we have to prepare for the next Commission. And we, of course, try to prepare the ground to at least have an informed discussion as to what may happen under the new Commission, whether it does become a gas package or not, whether it should be legislative measures or not, whether it should be non-legislative measures or not. This is, in fact, all on the table, and it will only be decided by the new Commission. But at least we try to inform this discussion as to the largest extent as we possibly can. Of course, this, especially when we are in the area of renewable gases and what will be there, many issues are on the table which for the moment have not yet been reflected upon very deeply, because we didn't have to reflect upon them 5 years ago. So if we, just to pick a few, if it's true that we will be in a number of years' time in a market where we will have more hydrogen, do we have to regulate this market, or should we leave scope for innovation? What are the no regret options? What are the things which can be tweaked now, or maybe we should leave to later? If we have hydrogen markets in comparison with today's methane market, are our efforts to make this market as liquid and accessible as possible going to be undermined by moving to new energy fuels, energy carriers, or can we create synergies between to do them? If we're going to have more blending in the gas network, which is, are we actually ready to do that? Do we have to adapt our standards? Should these standards be adoptable? Should the standards be more enforced? Because if we have variations and there's lots of different potentials in the member states of biogas or hydrogen, and they may make different choices, are we not going to risk the internal market by not having the ability to trade gases anymore across border tomorrow? If in a where gas and electricity markets are more integrated, are there elements which you have to change because the economic choices which operators will make, are they distorted by the fact that, for instance, tariffs and levies are different between these sectors, or the operational rules which are different between these sectors? Should they be more aligned to make sure that the most effective solution is going to be chosen? Because on this path to 2030, investment decisions will be made in the next 10 years, and we should not find out by 2050 that we invested lots of money in assets which actually should never have had by 2050. If we have renewable gases, should we subsidize our way out of this, or should we try to create value for these gases in order to make sure that not only do we have a market-based approach on things and reduce the number of subsidies, the level of subsidies which we needed, but also that we create additional value for these gases we will hope will penetrate the market in the midterm. If we're going to let's say to a change in energy carriers in the end user applications, where for instance for heating, for hybrid boilers, there's a consumer choice which is on the moment can be made between gas and electricity, and where new arbitrage opportunities will arise. Does it actually mean that the way these actors interact with the energy markets is that foreseen by the current regulatory framework, and can that be done efficiently in the current regulatory framework? If we have more injections on the distribution level, is it so that the regulatory structure and the way the DSOs and TSOs collaborate is actually suitable for the way for optimizing the network? There are plenty of questions, and I can actually double this list, as I just said. I'm sure you're very well aware of those, but it really reflects, and the fact that I asked them as questions, not as replies, really reflects the situation on which we are now. That this is an area which is relatively, let's say, virgin in terms of work, and it needs to be a lot of work needs to be done, and we know that we have to find reasonable answers to all of them to make sure that we and also choose the right questions in reality, which we have to reply to now and which can be left to later, in order to have a regulatory framework which is conducive for this development to happen. Because, of course, not only do we want to have a energy transition, we also want to have one which is at the lowest cost. And that means, in view of the uncertainty, that we are looking to an approach which, of course, technologically neutral, lots of uncertainty. We are not the best place to make the technology choices for tomorrow. But of course, that means a lot of emphasis on removing barriers. We are conducting a study to identify those so that we have a better picture as to what is relevant and which elements we need to remove on this market. And let's say to have the best informed that we are best informed in order to make these choices when the new commissioner comes and arrives and has finished hanging up his pictures and asked himself, what are we going to do now? Of course, we are not the only one who are thinking about that. You can even ask yourself the question whether we are the driver or we are being driven in this discussion. But what I think is important to emphasize today is that knowing this and knowing also that we have to find an answer, but also knowing that we cannot find that only by ourselves and that we have to involve all actors present in the sector today and maybe tomorrow to help us finding reasonable answers to these questions. That we've also, let's say in the Madrid Forum, we have engaged with the stakeholders and tried to ask them to help us in this reflection process. And of course the meeting today fits in this process because, as already was set out before, for CEER we have asked the very intriguing questions as to what the role of regulated entities will be and what is going to happen with the gas network if tomorrow we have different energy carriers and also less gas may be around, what we should do with the existing network. And I hope that the consultation document and your inputs thereof will become a very fruitful input for the reflection we are having and which you probably also very much eager to find an answer to. Thank you.
Hello? Yes. Excellent. Good. I'm turned on. Right. So my name is Markus Kook from eControl, but also working for CEER, and I have sort of followed the work, especially on this topic, on the frog study a few years ago, but also on this consultation document now for CEER. And I think, Augustine, thank you very much. I think all those questions, I have to say we also have a lot of questions in the consultation document, but I think the questions that you raised also shows that we are sort of aligned at least on those areas where we think is really also from the regulatory side focus to be put on. What I would like to do in the next half an hour is to give you a brief overview of the consultation document. I will do that by firstly presenting the various topics, the chapters, and then sort of briefly also saying what our proposed measure on that area would be. Sort of this is so that we're all on the same page. If you have questions, I would kindly ask you maybe to ask them when I'm finished, because I think I have to hurry up quite a bit that I'll make it through in half an hour. And for sure there will be time then for further discussion in the broader group, also in the sessions that we have then on these topics. So if I go to a little bit of background, I think a lot of what you have said, Pedro, is on there. So I think pretty much a year ago in this room we presented the frog study. It was very good work also with a consultant together with stakeholders. And I think what we did then is to really go in this follow-up work, in this consultation document, and asking ourselves, okay, what, from the regulatory point of view, what are the core areas that we can really work on, and which are the key issues, and that's where we are developing this CEER Vision, which is sort of at the end of the consultation process, the outcome. We mentioned the Madrid Forum tasks, so those are the ones that also in this presentation I would like to focus now on. So these two topics I would like to expand a bit more. And yeah, last but not least, this was mentioned, of course, so consultation is ongoing. Present responses, please, if you have any, by 17th of May. Just to let you know, you don't have to answer all the questions. I mean, there are 18. So, but if you feel, of course, you want to focus on a specific topic or area, then we are happy about any contribution to any of the questions. Okay. Firstly, before I go into the three main parts, I would like to just give you a little bit of a background what we understand with renewable gases, because I think there's we have a separate section on that. We just wanted to briefly define what we mean by that. So we say gases which energy content comes from renewable energy sources, so mainly biomethane, hydrogen, synthetic methane from renewable electricity. So we described this in one section. I think what is important here also to mention is this doesn't have to be all locally produced. I mean, even if we're discussing about sort of climate neutrality at least costs for the customers, it may also be that we have to import renewable gas from more low-cost production regions, also using, of course, as good as possible existing infrastructure for that. And some questions we already got, of course, is what about low carbon gas? So gas which is not of a renewable source. I think here, as was said, we are also technology neutral. We are open. I think also those gases with the low carbon gases will be part of the solution. I think we do not mention them all throughout the document, but at least in some parts, when we talk about repurposing of networks to hydrogen, I think there we talk about blue hydrogen. If we talk about guarantees of origin, I think there's also a role for making this transparent to the customer, that besides renewable gases, there are also sort of gases which have a low carbon footprint. So this is as a brief discussion about definitions. Now, if we look at the document, as Pedro also already mentioned, we have these three parts. Oh, they all have the number 1. So they're all equally important, but actually it's 1, 2, 3. So we start with regulatory challenges with a nice leaf, and I will go to that straight after. Then we have these infrastructure and investments and regulation topics, and then last but not least, some ideas about adapting the gas market design, about tariff issues and so on. Okay, so let's go to the first, and this is also one of the Madrid Forum topics, the scope of network operator activities, as it's called. I think firstly we would stress that unbundling is a fundamental pillar for achieving the objective of the internal gas market. And I think this has been CR position also within the clean energy package discussions. I think we would see primarily network operators as neutral market facilitators. So that's, I think, what the unbundling rules are also there for, to ensure that. I mean, in the meantime, this is the difference from the workshop that we had last year on the frog study. In the meantime, we have a clean energy package and quite this concept that network operators now on the electricity side should not own, develop, manage or operate energy storage facilities and recharging points for electrical vehicles is quite clear. This is, I think, in our view, even reinforced this concept in the clean energy package. But on the other hand, I think for gas, with the current situation, we still have the current legal framework maybe leaves some room for gray areas. There are some discussions here on some of the activities. I mean, we picked out in the consultation document 2, which is CNG, LNG fueling infrastructure and power to gas infrastructure. We looked at what's the current legal situation, what's sort of the gray area, if any. And I think we see for CNG, LNG infrastructure, we see that this is not prohibited, so not explicitly prohibited. I think what we would look at on a case-by-case basis is whether there is actually the role of the TSO is really limited to the technical operation of the infrastructure. So certainly not any selling of gas to customers at the stations is done. Regarding power to gas infrastructure, currently we see less of a gray area, because if you are saying power to gas, what is it? It's a plant that can be classified as a production plant. So it produces, it can inject gas or hydrogen into the gas network, and that's a production facility. And that's where I think the directive already today is quite clear that this is not allowed to be operated by network operators. So that's where we started from, status quo. I mean, there are numerous other examples. So that's one of the questions that we have in the consultation document. I was at the workshop a few weeks ago about CCS, CCU. Sort of there could be questions around what about these infrastructures for transporting CO2, CO2 storage, maybe capturing CO2. So there are, I think, many more examples. So that's, I think, just two of those potential new activities are picked out here. Now, the approach that we took is we have developed within CEER some time ago already, more with a focus on the DSO side. So we said, okay, let's have a general framework. Let's ask ourselves a set of questions, and we call this a conceptual tool. And basically, this is a sort of a decision tree, if you want. If you go through that, you can come up to sort of 3 main outcomes. Then you can say, okay, if I answer all these questions, this is clearly a core regulated activity, no doubt about that. This should be done by the network operator. The one in the middle is, of course, then the most interesting one. So you could come to an outcome where you say, okay, these are activities which, under certain conditions and with a special justification, may be allowed. And that's, of course, the focus now of our further thinking. And last but not least, I think it's also clear that there are certain activities either explicitly prohibited, like production or supply or trading of gas, but which is certainly a competitive and non-TSO activity. So, and this, I think, the conditions are important if we look at the second category. And I think the main questions for us would be, my main question around that would be, well, what's the justification? Why should a network operator do that? And I think one answer could be there are really net benefits for future or existing customers to be expected. So there is some involvement necessary, but there will be also sort of benefits then for gas customers in the future from that. And yeah, you have it in the consultation document. I will just go straight to the Clearcut case. So these questions, firstly, we ask, are there operators other than the TSO or DSO that currently carry out the activity? If it's no, fine. Is the activity potentially open to competition? If it's no, okay. Should the activity be carried out by a different, or could it be carried out by a different operator than the network operator? If no, does it really require an active role in the operation of the transmission or distribution network? And if it's yes, then it's clearly a core regulated activity. If, on the other hand, we come to different answers on some of those questions, so if the activity is potentially open to competition, yes, on the first one here, could it be done by a different operator than DSO, TSO? Yes, okay. And does it require an active role in the operation of the network? No. Then we come to this interesting box here, where we then have to look about, is there a special justification, cost-benefit analysis, some sort of argument and reasoning for why there should be a case for a TSO to carry out the activity. I mean, if the answer here is no, then I think we are back, to this part where we say this is a competitive non-TSO, DSO activity. Now let's go to another case is, of course, if, okay, this is sort of, there are other actors and the market is sufficiently developed, yes, okay, then we are also, I think, let the market do it. I think it's clear. But if we come to the conclusion, okay, the market is not yet sufficiently developed and there is a good justification for TSO, DSO involvement, then I think we come to this part, activity to be, or potentially to be allowed under conditions. And you can say this has again two sides to it. You could say, okay, within the regulated environment or outside. But And this is sort of not a once in a lifetime exercise, so this would be sort of on a regular basis. I think in certain intervals there should be a sort of a reassessment of these of the developments, the market changes, sort of a review of the outcome is necessary, and then one would have to go through these questions again and maybe coming to a different outcome then. So this is this conceptual tool. I think what we are very well aware of is that at least a limited involvement of TSOs and DSOs may be beneficial to kickstart the development of new technologies. But I think when it comes to conditions, we would have to sort of, I mean, for example, look at allow involvement up to a critical size, let's say, installed capacity, some sort of a threshold, or say right at the beginning for a certain period of time, 5 years, 10 years, but not longer. And of course, always if it's sort of to the benefit also to the public or to other actors, then it should be subject to transparency requirements, so that all that it is done for developing a certain technology is then also available to other players. So the proposal here would be the regulatory framework should be technology neutral, but it should allow for the flexibility in order to develop pilot and demonstration projects. And I mean, of course, we cannot ignore what has been done in the clean energy package. I think here similar provisions that are now in the clean energy package regarding conditions under which an activity may be performed should be considered here. Okay. Then I will go forward to the next chapter under this renewable challenges. We thought about, okay, it was mentioned the question, should we regulate hydrogen networks in the future? I think if we look around, what we see today is, okay, in most member states, existing hydrogen pipelines are mainly owned by companies which produce gas for industrial purposes. So this is the situation today. What we support in any case, also the work of CEN and others and TSOs, is that I think any project to increase the potential of hydrogen blending into the existing networks, that should be done, and this is very much supported. The question then comes, of course, more clearly with the full conversion, at least from the regulatory approach to that, full conversion of existing or repurposing of existing gas infrastructure. And here we say, it's a sort of dynamic regulation, flexible regulation. We say regulation should kick in if market analysis shows that there is a risk of abuse of market power, refusal of TPA. I mean, there are a lot of examples of where sort of existing gas infrastructure has been converted, a single pipeline in the Netherlands, for example, but there's one supplier, one customer. I think here the analysis would show that there is not yet any risk of abuse of market power. This is sort of between two industrial companies. But if we talk more about, let's say, really a broad number, distribution networks, a broad number of customers connected to the then hydrogen network, then I think this question to define the regulatory framework then will kick in. I mean, one idea could also be to say what's currently in place for gas storages, to say, okay, there should be a market analysis and then decided either for a more regulated or negotiated access regime could be imagined. That would sort of leave the flexibility and also to do changes or improvements as the market develops over time. Yeah, the proposal, flexible, dynamic approach to ensure that the regulation can kick in once it's required. Okay, then we have one topic on more the tariffication side. I think this was also mentioned. Role of tariffication of power to gas infrastructures. I think here also we have to be honest with ourselves. I think in most countries the current electricity and gas tariff systems do not really acknowledge the specific nature of power to gas assets. So I think here we want to make sure that in the national frameworks we should have a look that there are no distortions in the efficient deployment and use of this technology, which serves sector coupling. And for example, if there are sort of certain solutions already in place for electricity storages, like pumped hydro storages, that there is a good argument that these provisions made or similar provisions may also be applied to other electricity storage technologies. Okay, this was basically the first big chapter. Now I come to the more infrastructure regulation chapter. Here I think we have two smaller points and then of course the big one on decommissioning. But I mean, first of all, as said, I think going forward we want to make sure that we are careful with investments. We see significant uncertainties on the evolution of gas in the long run. So investment decisions shall be carefully assessed. And we think that a stronger oversight by ACER and NRAs of the TYNDPs and the CBA methodology and the underlying scenarios should be done. Ensuring a sound assessment of projects' value. So here I think it's just that we observe, but this has developed over the years, that we have quite a fragmented regulation when it comes to new infrastructures. We have the infrastructure package, we have the more market-based incremental network code. So I think here we have quite a detailed description of how a market-based test in the incremental process looks like. So I think here it's just about ensuring coherence between these different tools, between these different legislations, and especially a better coordination between the CAM, incremental capacity approach for new investments, and the PCI process. So the one building upon the other, saying, well, if we have done a market test within the context of an incremental project, then this can also serve as input, of course, to the PCI process, where also a market test is sort of required. Okay, now to the second to-do that we got from the Madrid Forum, the potential decommissioning of gas network infrastructure. I think the first important message from our side would be most NRAs do not see a reason to act in the near future. I think in many discussions that we had internally, this became clear. At national levels, I think there are a range of tools that are available, and I think also the FROG study highlighted a few of those which can be used. But I think we very much are aware that no universal solution exists, so we cannot say, yes, this is the thing we do everywhere, but it's a case-by-case analysis, case-by-case approach. Has to be a balanced approach, balancing the interest of the customers with the network operators' interests. Of course, in this context, it's also important to consider the repurposing of gas infrastructure. And looking more at the DSO level, just to say that also there, maybe the issues are different than on the transmission level, but there I think CEER is also working and expected to publish work on stranded assets at DSO level later in 2020. So this is ongoing work, but I think it's at least at transmission level currently NRAs do not see a reason to act in the near future. However, what we would consider as a no-regret measure here is more or a better coordination process already at European level, so at EU level. I think this is something we should not be over-bureaucratic, but we see that There can be, of course, effects on adjacent member states if a sort of capacity is reduced in another member state. So there should be a process in place where the affected member state has the possibility to demonstrate that an asset has still a benefit to them for security of supply, for example. And when this is the case, that this benefiting member state then is also offered the possibility to cover a fair level of the costs and to maintain the asset alive. And as I said, this should not be something completely new. We should build upon existing processes here. I think we have planning, TYNDP process. I think this could be more in general planning changes in capacity levels, looking at the cross-border level, and we could also apply a similar approach than we have in the infrastructure regulation about cost-benefit analyses, cross-border cost allocation, if any, for sharing decommissioning costs. So I think here these are processes which are there for new investments, for new capacity, and I think it could be adapted or sort of enlarged to also include sort of changes in capacity levels and reductions. NRAs, I think that's a to-do for us on the national levels. I think we should consider designing regulatory tools to deal with the risk of stranded assets based on the sort of regulatory framework in place at the national level. And at EU level, we would, I think, thinking about a coordinated EU framework for decommissioning of cross-border assets might be a good thing to do going forward. Okay. Last but not least, this is now the part on sort of gas market design, regulation of access to infrastructures. Here, I think, decrease of demand, termination of long-term contracts. I think these developments, they are challenges in a way that how to deal with also with network tariffs and network tariff design more generally. I think here also a careful approach is necessary, but in some areas, I think there is the risk that the market could then become less liquid as spreads between the market could increase. But I think there is the risk of cost recovery issues, so I think it's the specific tariffs increasing, then tariffs, and then the spreads between markets widening, and this sort of actually leading to a situation which is worse than we have today, where we still have long-term contracts in place and sort of more cross-border trading based on that. So I think here we would propose a careful bottom-up approach, sort of looking at specific solutions at regional levels. How could this be done at certain interconnection points between two markets, maybe three, a small number of markets. This could then also involve inter-TSO compensation mechanisms at that level. But we should learn from those experiences, so from certain regions, and then deciding whether we should go for a larger ITC mechanism, because as we know, I think that generally these discussions on money and on ITC is quite complex to be had at European level. Okay, so thank you very much. Just a few next steps. Public consultation is ongoing. What we would do, I think we would also summarize then based on today the discussion. We would take this also with us, of course, together with the written responses. We would present first findings of the whole discussion process and of the initial evaluation of the comments at the Madrid Forum. So this is expected, at least on those two topics that we have been asked to work on. And what we do afterwards is then we do, of course, an evaluation of responses, and then we would sort of finalize this CR conclusion paper in the third quarter this year. Okay, thank you very much. then I would invite the first panel and Pedro as the moderator.
Well, we have organized it so we are in time. Thank you, Marcus, for that. We have now two panel discussions. The first one, I will be the moderator. The second one, Tom will be the moderator. Tom is the vice chair of the gas working group, CEER and ACER gas working group. And also Tom will make the closing remarks. So, thank you very much for joining me here. And we see that our colleague from the European Commission addresses the several questions that are quite amazing, and our document also addresses a lot of issues for discussion, totally in line with the European Commission vision. So if we have those alignments, then we have a common perspective of the risks that we face in future. And of course, we are also other issues. Yeah, thank you. We have also other issues regarding sector coupling and also challenges. We are talking here on challenges for natural gas sector, but I think those challenges will also be. We have impact and pressure on the electricity sector, and when we are talking about sector coupling, we may also try to find coupling and common methodologies applying for electricity and natural gas. Also, we are here discussing a vision for the natural gas sector, but clear, I think that at the end of this discussion and having defining a common vision, this common vision on the natural gas sector will also have its effects on the electricity sector. And due to that, we have this first panel, and I have here. Okay, so I have here with me Jan from ENTSOG and Dimitrius from ENTSO-E, James Watson from Eurogas, and Valentin from IFIEC, and Marion Labatut from Euroelectric. And well, we had in the agenda, we have two questions. The first one, what interactions between regulated and contestable activities? We have made a proposal in our document. And the second one, what regulatory tools to stimulate renewable gas development? Namely, trying to what regulatory codes and rules we have to change in order to ensure that we facilitate this energy transition. We have other questions, so I open the floor, starting from Jan, please.
Thank you very much, Pedro. And thanks for the invitation and the initiative of CEER. I think it's an important area to have a good and broad discussion on. I think one of the first and more overall challenges is actually to agree on what are we aiming for here regarding the regulation and the vision that we have for this? And I can fully understand, of course, the Commission is awaiting a new Commission and somehow cannot bind the next Commission. So it's about putting out our wishes for the next steps here. And I can understand there are discussions on: are we even talking about a gas package? What is the nature of this animal overall? Would it be a small package potentially with some market tweaks and some adaptations, or will it be a more visionary package where gas is really brought into the overall energy policy perspective, and together with electricity is forming the backbone of the European future energy policy, as what we are using the term a hybrid energy system, where we are building on the strengths of both the systems, electricity and gas, both the existing systems, but of course also to find how can the two systems work better together in the future, how can the two systems support each other in the future. And I think that requires probably a larger package than just some market tweaks here and there. So therefore, one of the introduction points from my side would be to go for the more visionary part. Another key issue, I think, is that the speed of the transition and the magnitude of the transition is immense, and gas is still 23-24% of the European total energy consumption. So it's important that gas will be included here, and it will play an important role, and also in the decarbonization. I think the steps to take there, that it's actually not only being seen as something which should be ruled out in the longer run, but as a tool, in a bridge in the transition, also beyond the 2050. So to get the speed there in the transition, I think gas will be needed, and also to meet the challenges of the magnitude of the challenge that we are standing in front of. Then we have the discussion on contestable versus regulated activities. We're not so fond of this vocabulary. We think it's a matter of whether it's a regulated or whether it's a commercial activity, which I think is a fully valid discussion to have. We know there will be some discussions. Eurogas and us have some discussions on this already, and that is, I think, is all fine. For us, it's about getting the speed in the transition, getting things actually to happen. If the market can deliver, then fine. Mm-hmm. I mean, then the market should deliver. The problem is the market do not fully deliver on the decarbonization, on the climate goals. It delivers, of course, on the market goals, but the climate component is not really included here. And so, therefore, we need some kind of driver behind it. Whether it should then be subsidies, which we are hearing from the Commission, probably not so much more subsidies, and definitely not feed-in tariffs, etc. So we have to look into other solutions, and I think regulation and regulated assets for decarbonization of different kinds could be a relevant consideration. One of the examples, power to gas. I think now Markus explained that it was considered as a production facility. I think we would rather see it as an energy conversion facility. We have some examples already around in blending station in the gas system between high cal and low cal, which is something similar. That's a part of the system, but of course with the regulated access and with the regulated tariffs, etc., etc. And I think in this discussion, whether it's commercial or regulated, I think we also need to look into what is actually beneficial for the market functioning. So having, for instance, a power-to-gas plant being run as a regulated asset with regulated tariffs and with the open access rules could, I think, benefit the market players in general and handling the commodity. So I think we need to have this full discussions on this. the decision tree that we were also going through, I mean, it's fully relevant. Whether it should be exactly like that, I don't know. But there are some good questions there which we need to take into account. And finally, I'll just mention the interplay between the gas and electricity markets, because one thing is to discuss regulated or commercial activities, but we also need to have the gas and electricity dimension a part of that. Should the investment be done by electricity players or gas players or joint ventures, as we also see in Germany, for instance? So who will invest? How to allocate the costs and benefits between the two markets, and how to handle taxation, levies, subsidies, etc. across the two sectors are important elements. So it's a complicated, very complicated issue, and we are going into a process where we are developing a roadmap for handling some of these issues, which are those issues, of course, closest to the TSOs, the gas TSOs. And we will also have a discussion with the market players, with the stakeholders on this. So that would be my introductory remarks.
Thank you very much. We have, I didn't said, but we have 5 minutes for each panelist. And Jan uses just
So
the
no
5
more.
minutes, no more.
Okay.
Now, please, Dimitrios, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And let me start by saying I'm impressed with the turnout. I wish a similar electricity event will have the same turnout, and I think it says a lot. It says a lot about the subject we're discussing. I'm representing NSOE today, so the point of view of electricity transmission operators. So forgive me if my scope is narrower than the debate today, but I think it's an important element to consider, and I hope that I will convince you today about it. For us, sector coupling, the first thing I need to mention is that many people reduce sector coupling between gas and electricity. It's not just that. Sector coupling, the need for sector coupling is to be able to use all the means available to us now or in the future in order to achieve the energy transition in the most efficient way. So sector coupling is also between electricity and heat, gas and heat, transport, mobility, industry, and so on. So I think one of the first elements to keep in mind when we talk about these things, let's have an overall system perspective before we decide things, because there are effects between all sectors. Now, since I'm in a gas workshop, I will talk about gas, and I will talk about the power to gas. Power to gas, yes, is driven by the need to decarbonize the gas sector. It's also driven by needs identified within the electricity sector. So there are synergies there. We can see these synergies. We can see the synergies in terms of the flexibility needed by the electricity system to integrate all the renewables, the need for seasonal storage, the need to rationalize infrastructure building. So for us, sector coupling between electricity and gas is mostly harmonizing or coordinating better our infrastructure in order to provide the most cost-efficient solution to the society. Now, doing that, an important thing, and I will not go into the technical details, is location, capacity, and operation of power to gas are crucial in order to reap the maximum benefits of these synergies. These are things, I don't claim I have the answers to all of these things. What I'm saying is that in order to be able to say we effectively couple the sectors in order to achieve a cost-efficient solution for society, these three things are of primary importance, and they should be considered at every point of the discussion. These are the synergies I was talking about. One other element, again, having the sector coupling in mind, and I think it was tackled in your paper, which I found it very good, by the way, and thank you for that. We have to agree across sectors what is green. What is green, what is blue, what is red, what is black. We have to agree on these things in order for regulation to be effective, in order not to distort the sectors respectively. So that's one learning. technical neutral regulation, we fully support that. For example, hydrogen should be treated like any other vector. It shouldn't, regulation should not hinder the development of hydrogen. Uncertainties are very high. Everybody says we're talking about an uncertain future, but regulation should be technology neutral in order to leave these solutions evolve whenever it's necessary. Last thing is some self-advertisement on sector coupling with our friends with NSOG. We have started already introducing this sector coupled approach. Our common scenarios is a first step. And I would say that the learnings out of this exercise, I think, surpass our expectations. We're not there yet. I mean, the common scenarios, I still maintain, is the biggest part of sector coupling between gas and electricity. It's not the only one, and you have a lot of issues to discuss in the TYNDP later on, which I'm not invited, so it's okay. But but I think NSOG and NSOE have taken a proactive step forward with the common scenarios. We're working further on that. We're going to deliver something new next time, something even better, I hope, in 2022, and so on. So these are things to be closely monitored by stakeholders, by Acer. I fully agree with the statement that Acer should have a role and a special input, let's say, into these scenarios, because they're critical. I mean, this is the first and most important step in sector coupling, whatever meaning you put next to that. That's it. I hope I kept my 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, we are in time. Now we have James from Eurogas. Please, James.
Thank you very much, and I must say thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. It is a great pleasure to come along and contribute to this debate. And so yes, it is a very important debate that we're having ahead of what we suspect will be coming out of the European Commission in the next year or so. And I think that in Eurogas we have been, of course, also wrestling with these ideas. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we do, of course, represent the market, but we also represent the distribution system. So we're a kind of two-headed beast, if you like, and perhaps it's not always possible to see eye to eye, but we do our best, and we always try to find the right way, as I'm sure Marion will tell you from the electricity perspective. And so that sort of leads us to the question of how do you go forward in this new era of the energy system? And I would just make the footnote on that. A lot of people talk about gas and gas versus electricity. And gas. In Eurogas, we take the view this is an energy transition. We're all going to be needed. We all have to work together. We think that it's important, indeed, as you've alluded to, the work that is being done on sector coupling should be done in coherent fashion between NSOG and NSOE, TYNDPs. All of these things now need to be done together. We need to plan together. And that's because I think we have to look at how we want new technologies to develop, to deliver on our climate change agenda. The issue, of course, is in Eurogas, we like the market. And why not? We all love markets. We're part of the common market. We have electricity markets, we have gas markets, we like markets. Why do we like markets? Because they're efficient. They deliver the objectives that we have as a society in the most cost-optimal way. That's why we've gone through all the trouble of creating markets. So we would say the best way of achieving an objective is finding the market solution to do it, because it's the best way of doing something for society. The problem is that markets don't always deliver, or they always deliver on a specific point, but not necessarily the one you're trying to achieve. And that's where we need to look at whether or not the market is the only tool that can deliver the objective that you want. So in Eurogas, what we think is that you have to look for things like the new technologies that we want to see developed. Power to gas is a good example, as Jan gave. Is the market going to deliver it? Are we going to set up the right regulatory framework, which kind of touches on the second question you have for us? Will we create the right regulatory framework for the market to invest in new technologies? Or will we need to look elsewhere? In principle, we believe you should always look to the market first. You should create the right framework to allow the market to try and take on the challenge, to try and invest in the new technologies and deliver the economic business models that will help society. Where, of course, that doesn't take place, say you've held a competitive tender, you aren't able to find anybody who's willing to take part, then yes, I think you have to look at what your climate objective is and say that's the prime objective, and thus we cannot wait for the market to move, we need to move. And in those situations where the market hasn't responded to the opportunity, we would cautiously suggest that you would be able to look at perhaps some of the regulated bodies, would be able to move in and indeed develop those assets. We call them assets because it's not just about power to gas, it's also things like CNG, LNG terminals, all of those sort of things, fueling stations. So it's not just one, so I call them assets for the group. And then I think you have to think, okay, how would that look like? Surely it has to be time limited, a bit like Marcus was suggesting through the consultation that CEER have put out. Yes, I think we have to look at time limited ownership. Whether or not they can operate it should be another discussion, whether or not it's put in place for others to use. Those are the type of questions we would need to answer. But we think very much it should be time limited, and eventually you would take a market test to assess whether or not there is market possibilities to take over that, so that in the end the market does operate these new assets. In a way, it's a bit like what we've already seen with the clean energy package, perhaps slightly nuanced, but in line with this kind of thinking in general, in line with what the European Commission has done in the past. But we do think that that's probably the right way to look at the climate situation. If the market doesn't deliver what we need for climate, it will deliver the best price. Will it necessarily deliver the assets you want to fight climate change? Then that's something else you have to look at. And I think if you do it in that way, you probably find the least painful way for society to deliver upon the climate change objectives. I reiterate the point that we think that it's very important the infrastructure is planned together now. It shouldn't be seen as electricity or gas. It should be combined. We should be looking at this. It is the right way to deal with things like the TYNDP. It only makes sense because this will be the way that we optimize things. We need to be optimal in the way we address the climate change challenge. And I refer finally, I don't know if I've run out of time yet, but I refer finally to the regulatory framework. In Eurogas, we think that if you create the right regulatory framework, you can already solve a lot of the issues that you might face. And for example, if you create the idea that by 2030 you should have targets that could reflect for renewable decarbonized gases, you would actually create an environment which might encourage market players to get engaged, encourage member states to enact the right legislation that could facilitate the activities of market players to deliver those new assets. And so we think we have to look very carefully at the frameworks that we want to set up, and the messages we want to send to the market, and the messages we want to send to the regulated asset base. And I think that if we get this right, we should be able to solve our solutions in the most cost-optimal way. And I think that is important when we consider the huge amount of money that needs to be spent to deliver upon our climate change objectives. And I'll stop there before I lose my voice. Thank you.
Thank you, James. And now Valentin from IFIEC, please, can you share your ideas with us?
Yes, thank you, Pedro, and thank you for the invitation. We very much like being here. And I would like to take the opportunity to give a little broader view what our members are facing at the moment. As you all know, our members need to decarbonize. We should be net zero by 2050. And in order to do that, we need to change our processes. We need to go from fossil fuels to renewable sources. And in order to get there, we need huge investments which lay ahead of us. And some people already call it the valley of death we must go through. And of course, all our members are checking now what other opportunities or what other challenges ahead, what technologies we can use for example, the steel industry. They're very much like hydrogen. Maybe they can switch their processes to renewable hydrogen. And just to give you a number, per million tons of steel, you need investment costs for around 1 billion euros. So that you get a first feeling, they have to invest a lot. They have to put their money onto the right technology, which has a future in Europe. And this leads us to the next question. Everywhere they are looking, every technology somehow leads to the source of renewable electricity. So the first question we are asking is, how much more electricity will we need in the future? We know there's a study from the Commission, a 2050 study, and which is very detailed with a lot of numbers in it. And we are questioning if the numbers, even with where we have a lot of hydrogen, if the numbers for the demand for electricity are right. We have done studies ourselves from our chemical companies, and we come to much higher numbers regarding the demand for electricity. That is interlinked, of course. If you have a much higher demand for electricity, you need much more infrastructure in electricity. You need much more investments. We see that currently in my home country, in Germany, we just for the investments to 2030, just for the power lines inside Germany, it's around 55 billion euros at the moment, and it gets costlier every time we discuss about it because of the most of the lines should be in the underground because of the public protests. So we have a lot of investment in infrastructure. Additionally to that, you have the investments if you want to connect offshore wind parks. This comes on top. So you have a huge number for infrastructure costs, also for that switching processes. And if we look at that, you mentioned it, we have a penetration should be 50% by 2030 from renewables. And the problem of all renewables is, of course, the sun isn't always shining, the wind isn't always there, so we have times when there's no sun or wind. They are intermittent, where we need backup capacities, and we will get more and more times in the future where we have an excess of renewables. And this is also leads to rising system costs in electricity. In Germany, we're talking about 1.4 billion euros at the moment per year. But that's something where we can, where we see that maybe sector coupling can kick in, and also our members can contribute if we have the right regulatory framework and the right incentives. And I found it very interesting what Markus presented with the power to gas, with exemptions for power to gas. But I'm there with Dimitrios. It should also be power to heat. To give you an example, if an industrial player has an CHP, and we can do an investment in an electric heater. So if the system needs support, if there is an excess of renewables in the system, we can go down with our CHP and generate the heat from the electric heater. So this is some kind of a storage for electricity. We use a renewable electricity, and in that time we do not use the gas. The problem is, for example, there's a big regulatory barrier when it comes to network tariffs in electricity. Normally in electricity, your network tariffs is derived from your peak load, which you have over a year. So if you normally, as CHP, you use it for your own consumption, it's seldom that you use the network, so your peak load is very low. If you use electricity from the outside network to use an electric heater, your peak load will go up, and then it's not economical, sensible anymore to use that electric heater. So we not just need exemptions for power to gas. I think we can establish a system where everyone or every market participant or technology which is helping, for example, the electricity system, because of the intermittency, we could think of special rules. Like I told, no peak for the electricity tariffs, or you could take up no taxation in the times where you take out the electricity, which is too much in the networks. And I think that's where industry can help to provide solutions for the future. And of course, we need to look at the whole package to find the most cost-efficient way how to get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Valentin. And now, Marriott, please, from your electric.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. I think what I can say, first of all, is that the questions are relevant, both for the panel and also in the consultation, and we are really in the process with our members to defining some of the detailed positions. I would reiterate, of course, some of the points which have been made by the panelists at the benefit of coming last. But I would indeed say that a global approach to decarbonization is what we need. We need to start from the fact that achieving carbon neutrality is a common objective for the energy system, but also as an economy. Therefore, we need to look at the penetration of clean energy carriers in a range of sectors such as heating, transport, but also industries. And that's really the more global perspective from which we need to start. The first principle which I would like to highlight is, of course, the cost-effective decarbonization. I think we need to be very cautious in making some preliminary choices on what kind of energy carriers will end up where, and we should set up the right market frameworks which will ensure that the market delivers and delivers the cheapest energy transition for the consumers. So the first point is really markets in the first place, and I would agree with what James said there. And in the discussion on what's the role between regulated and commercial activities, I agree with your terminology here, Jan. Market first, indeed. We have some very good basis in the clean energy package, which we spent considerable amount of time discussing in all our organizations and industries, and we could probably get inspired from that in terms of having the market test, checking whether a market solution is available, which would ensure the most cost-effective solution. And if the market is not there, then look at alternative possibilities and potentially at the role of TSOs and DSOs to kickstart some of the activities. Obviously, reassessing that situation on a regular basis would be indeed very important to make sure that we don't foreclose nascent markets. Our members, who are DSOs, but also generators, utilities in general, they see a huge potential in this sector coupling and synergies between gas and electricity. Electrolyzers providing hydrogen to produce clean steel, for example, and we're just at the beginning of this cooperation and of these partnerships between sectors. So I think we have to be very cautious here in defining the rules and deciding that some regulated players, for example, should play a very important role because we don't know exactly yet how this will develop. Going a little bit further in terms of sector coupling, of course, it's infrastructure, and doing the TYNDP together, it's absolutely crucial. We're just at the beginning of the process there. But making sure that we have a regulatory framework on both the electricity and the gas side that takes into account the synergies of both markets. For example, the fact that power-to-gas facilities and gas storage in the future could provide a great deal of seasonal flexibility for a power system which will run with high levels of renewables. Are we in a position to value that in a proper way? I mean, seasonal flexibility is going to be a huge need of the power system when we have 60% or 80% of renewables in the future. It will also be a world where, as I said, we will have a competition between energy carriers. I think that electricity has done a lot in terms of achieving decarbonization goals so far. Other energy carriers will kick in. So how do we look at taxes and levies? How do we look at having a level playing field between these carbon neutral energy carriers going forward? So I think, as I said, it's a range of very relevant questions and very critical points in terms of synergies and touch points between the sectors, which were maybe more limited in the past and which will grow exponentially in future. That would be my introductory remarks.
Thank you, Miriam. Now we will open the floor to questions, but I think we heard a lot of good and interesting positions. We know that one of the issues, and was one of the questions of our consultation document, regarding the application of regulation to those activities. Of course, we know clearly what is the natural monopoly and why we need to apply to the natural monopoly, the activities that have characteristics of natural monopoly, where the incremental cost of delivery is lower than the average cost. We are not talking about that here in these new type of activities. Of course, this is the core business of the NREA and the existence of the NREA. But we are talking about activities with maybe huge positive externalities. And due to that, when you have positive externalities, the investment will be lower than the needed by the society. And this is the issue. And if it is the case, how we can handle that with regulation? Regulation can help it or not is one of the questions to that I can raise and was already discussed here. Another thing is the cost of flexibility. We know that with the new technology based on renewables for electricity generation has a lower levelized cost clearly. The problem or the big challenge will be on the flexibility. Now flexibility, the business on ancillary services markets represents mainly 5% of the global business on energy. So 95% of the cost is on the spot market, on the commodity price of electricity, not on the reserves, the balancing needed. With this huge transition, I wonder if the biggest cost will be on the cost of reserves, the cost of flexibility. And if it is the case, the way in electricity, how we procure this flexibility, namely involving consumers, can of course, and if we don't have a holistic approach to this issue, taking also into account power to gas, and we find solutions that they don't have a holistic vision, we can clearly we will not be technology neutral. We will maybe value differently some means of flexibility offer. And this is also one of the issues, how we can treat these new technologies in an undiscriminatory way, as we are finding it or buying it on the through procurement of the DSO or TSO. How we cannot treat this flexibility that can be offered by the natural gas sector, because hopefully the cost of flexibility offered by natural gas sector is lower. Molecules can be compressed. Without the electron is just in the real time. So how we can use the natural gas sector in a similar level playing field that we are adopting or using some measures in the electricity sector. So this is also one of the issues or the challenges. Another one is, nowadays our society is quite dependent on energy and is quite resilient. We have a lot of ways to deliver energy to supply the needs of our EU consumers. And it's astonishing when I see the results of simulation models regarding what will be the next generation mix. We will rely in a small numbers of carriers or vectors, energy vectors. And this is clearly something that we have to and namely in one energy vector that we don't have flexibility there. The electricity travels at the speed of light. You don't have enough in electricity. We will have a problem that you cannot handle. And in gas we don't have those difficulties. And so this is also one of the challenge that and the positive externalities of some of those technologies that cannot be addressed by the investor. This is also one of the issues. And the fourth is of course the oversight or supervision of the 10 INDP. So we have private companies, TSOs from gas and electricity, making their models, projecting the needs for the investments. Presently, we are improving. Presently in different, in a decoupled way, without any interaction and any harmonization. And without or with the lack of oversight of some entity that identifies the needs and then the solutions appear by the promoters. So here we have something also to rethink about it. We have the promoters that have own interest in investing, finding the promoting or finding the needs of the society. So here also is one of the issues that was discussed. I think we have some agreement there, and is one of the issues of our paper. Well, now please, we have some moments to take questions on board. Please.
Do I shout or is there a microphone?
I don't know.
I
Yeah.
can shout.
Thank you. Doug Wood from EFET. We were joking over lunch about some of the usual differences between the gas and the electricity debate, and how electricity people see the similarities between gas and electricity, and gas people see the differences between gas and electricity. And I see Agustin stands up early. Sorry to pick on you. We haven't met, and I'm picking on you already. Stood up at the beginning and talked about some of the differences in market design between gas and electricity, and whether that's contributing to inefficiencies that we need to look at. But I come back and I say, okay, so what do we? Let's look at the electricity sector. And one of the challenges in the electricity side is it's always had a history of very nationalistic energy policies, whether it's French nuclear or German lignite or non-nuclear or British gas or Polish coal or whatever. It's a very highly nationalised circumstance, and that's led to highly individualistic subsidisation mechanisms for renewables, which has put in place great difficulties over cross-border trading of certification schemes or guarantees of origin or so on, or to very nationalistic capacity remuneration mechanisms, which has significantly undermined the cross-border tradability of electricity markets. And my concern is that if we start to make gas look like electricity in terms of adopting a highly national approach to these things, we will be going backwards rather than forwards. And I was a little surprised that when we went around the panel talking about regulatory challenges, no one mentioned a national versus European approach as a potential challenge. So I'd like to re-ask the panel, was that deliberate? Do you see the national versus European debate over energy policy to be a challenge, or is that less than some of the other stuff and you're quite frankly not bothered about it?
Another question? We join. Yes, please.
Vikram Balajan from Frontier Economics. I found the figure that Marcus presented in his presentation quite helpful for sort of thinking through what might sort of be covered by regulated or non-regulated activities. I just had a question maybe about the last box on that figure. So there was sort of a box around. Is there I think what was the wording? Is there a special justification for this activity being handled by a regulated player? And I guess I just wondered whether there's a risk of that being, well, sounding quite open, and whether that maybe needs to be predefined to avoid, so there needs to be some maybe predefined conditions for that to avoid it creating potential uncertainty for players.
Mm-hmm. And more questions, please, Marcus?
Yes. Okay. Thank you for the question. Yeah. No. You're right. I mean, sort of this. We haven't specified the exact. Yet we haven't yet gone into that. So how to do this really? Then what would be the special justification? But what we see, and we have sort of asked our colleagues at the national level, sort of what were the practices applied so far. So we have a number of examples. Some of them are also mentioned in the frog studies in Ireland with CNG and so on. So you can say, okay, there are at the national level a decision was taken, okay, to support the CNG stations, and the TSO should have a role in that and should support this, and this is included for a certain period of time. So, I mean, I think it's now the task for us, to look at these examples and to come up with a more refined going forward or looking at this. That's true. And also, I mean, we haven't looked at really how a market testing should be done, or a tendering, or who should do that and how. And this is something we haven't. But we're happy if you, as Frontier Economics, have any input or have to work on that. Always very happy for that. Yeah.
More questions, please, for the panelists. We will have time. No more questions? So, starting by Jan, regarding national versus European.
I got some minutes left.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Doug. I think it's more the multitude of different issues that you could address. I think, from my side at least, it was not deliberate that I didn't mention the dilemmas between national and European level. I think there are dilemmas on a number of cases. I mean, the most overall of it, we can also hear on the climate ambitions might even be different between the member states. So already there you have, on a very high level, you have some differences. And I think in whatever is happening on the gas sector with the biomethane coming in, with hydrogen either as pure hydrogen systems or blended systems, I think one of the key issues that we need to be aware of is to maintain a European gas market. And maybe we do not have the full answer on how to do that. Maybe we need to look into digitalization solutions actually because I mean, hydrogen and gas and biomethane, it's still energy in gaseous form. And if we can use the new technology to ensure that we can handle this, and the TSOs and DSOs can handle this on behalf of the market, I think that is, of course, requiring quite some cross-border, quite some cooperation between the member states and some alignments on the European level. And I think also what James was mentioning on the certificates and there is a apparent need for some coordination and some alignment to get the guarantees of origin, to get the certification systems, to get the tradability across the borders, to get the different dilemmas with the taxes, levies, subsidies, somehow to be able to have the markets actually more fluid, more functioning. So no, I think you have a point.
Marian, please.
No, agree. It was not a deliberate choice from my side neither, and I would agree that we need to avoid a further fragmentation when we decarbonize the gas sector, even if, of course, member states are in charge of their security of supply, member states are in charge of defining their energy mix, and these are realities. And we need to make sure that we establish the cooperation at the regional and EU level as much as possible, while recognizing this fact that member states remain in control on many of these aspects. Now, I think that positive developments are happening, and on the electricity side as well, and with the clean energy package, the governance regulation. For example, system adequacy on the electricity side really needs now to be done in cooperation with the neighboring countries, so not trying to ensure security of supply at a completely only national level. And these are steps which really go in the right direction. The national energy and climate plans, which are not electricity plans, but the global plans for decarbonization of the different countries, have to be discussed in groups of countries. So you could say these are small steps, but still, I think we're going in that direction of having more discussions on between member states on how to achieve these energy policy and climate goals in a more coordinated way.
James, please.
Yeah, I think I also didn't really go into it, Doug, as in a way I kind of consider it a given for many of the reasons that Marian and Jan have already mentioned. What I would do, though, is shine a light a little bit on ourselves. And in a way, you said there are national champions because of specific resources in electricity. But in my experience, which admittedly is limited. I've spent a lot of time out of Brussels, though, visiting many countries. I would say there are also still national champions in our world who are also not perhaps fully adhering to what the European Commission has already done in the third package. So my view would be we also have to get our own house in order before we start worrying about others. But of course, in the gas sector, we will you will also see that countries that have specific resources are more likely to go down routes, say biomethane. France sets a 10% renewable gas target by 2030, has a big agricultural sector. This is a no-brainer for them. Denmark's already, I see Denmark's already at 10% for biogas and biomethane. So of course there will be that interplay. What the job of the European Union, though, is to make sure that it doesn't lead to, cross-border issues. We need to make sure that we're able to trade things across border, not just GOs and certificates, but actually also transfer energy. And so we need to become better and better at this. And then again, I shine the light on us and I say, well, at least in my time in the Baltics, I was quite enthused about the fact that Finland, Estonia and Latvia will create a common gas market as of 2020. So they will have, for many aspects of it, they'll have similar policies and increased competition, which is beneficial for the people that live there. You might argue that they're small gas countries, so that's irrelevant. What they're actually trying to do is create a kind of a blueprint, if you like, for regional cooperation, regional markets, and I think that's actually a very good thing, which is kind of overcoming this idea that energy is our most jealously guarded competency as a member state, and actually we'll be safer and better off if we actually cooperate and create a common gas market between our three countries. So I think there are reasons to be positive about the direction we can go in terms of EU integration and cooperation across border, but we have to guard against some of the national championisms which exist, I think, all across the energy sector, and not just in electricity.
Valentin, please. You can answer those issues or add something new topic.
I'm just thinking what to say. I totally agree with you, Doug, that if we look at electricity, it's much more national. When I came here to Brussels some years ago, everyone had the feeling on the national scale that electricity was light years ahead from the regulation and what's happening there. And then we started here discussing gas, and what we found out when we discussed all those network codes, it went really efficient and fast. We needed 6 network codes in gas, and they are all through. They are on their way to implementation. If you look at electricity, it's much more complex also on the technical level. I think we have 12 network codes in electricity. Not all are implemented now. And we have a lot of national rules still under discussions. And you can see it also in the taxes and levies. If you look at in most countries, you look at this is the gas price, these are the taxes and levies. If you look at the electricity, you sometimes have half. Half is the electricity price, and the rest are taxes and levies. And we see that also if we discuss it with our national working party electricity. If you turn one wheel in electricity, there's one person on the table that I get more and 3 get less and 5 get the same. So this is much more complex and interlinked when it comes to electricity, but I'm totally with you if we are going for the sector coupling model. If we want to interlink gas and electricity, we should definitely go the European path.
Dimitrios, please.
It must be boring for you to have a panel that agrees with you. So I'm not gonna do anything heretic here. I mean, it's if you just focus on power to gas, it's quite normal. I mean, from the electricity point of view and the use of power to gas within the electricity, we have very different systems. I mean, the mathematics, the economics of power to gas are going to be very different when applied in Germany or in France or in Denmark or in Greece or wherever. I mean, it's not one size fits all. So we should be accepting that there's going to be some national specificities around. I think what there would be agreement, and I think it was mentioned in the beginning, and I regret not stressing it in my opening speech, is the pilot projects should be supported. We need to gain operational experience. I mean, before we launch ourselves, we need to get some experience how these things are going to be operated exactly. I mean, there are so many open questions, technical questions that we need to learn. And we need to have soon, and by soon I mean in the next decade or a bit more, real size pilot plants or operational plants in order to gain this experience to get better decision making on these issues. If it is a European approach or not, I mean, I think I agree with my colleagues here.
Thank you. I totally agree with my colleagues. When we are, we just agree in short time. When we are looking for long term, it's more easy to have an agreement. I think this is one of the challenges that we have. So things are evolving very fast. We have now achieved common rules on the gas sector and on the electricity sector. So we have we are indeed implementing the market, the internal energy market, and this is, I think, one of the risks of this process regarding the speed, and also regarding the different the point of beginning. So we have different weather conditions, we have a lot of differences that may deliver different national solutions in terms of energy transition. And I think this is one of the main challenges, is that also knowing that how we can proceed in a common direction to the future without losing what we have achieved till now. Please. So this is for me one of, of the main risks and challenges that we face in this process.
Well, I just wanted to emphasize is that today we speak a lot about sector coupling, energy transition, how we're going to make this happen. But of course we should not forget, and you're actually quite right to point this out, is that ultimately we have an internal market in order to have the most competitive surroundings in order to deliver a most cost-effective energy supply to consumers. And this is certainly not forgotten. It was not forgotten in the market design package, where we took a lot of measures in order to look at the things which, in order to have a better internal market, to take away the regulatory problems which we had left from the past. I just mentioned the cross-border capacity allocation problems for in this area, but also in the gas sector. I didn't emphasize that when I was making my introductory comments, but also there we are looking at issues which are really, let's call them classical gas market design features, where we want to have a look at the, let's say, the third package as we had it in 2009, look at what it has delivered in terms of competitive pressure, and see what areas we can make, despite the progress, more steps in order to make it even more competitive. So this is, and I emphasize this because you say national champions and so on, but ultimately the best weapon against national champions is competition, and this we keep on the agenda also.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we are in time. We can move to the second panel. Tom, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, so please have a seat. Where you? So we are here for the second panel of today. I invited 4 of my friends, I could say even. And yeah, we have 1 panelist less, so that means more time for you to to make your point. Of course, we should also give some time and opportunity for the audience to ask questions. But of course, let's start with the questions that are on the agenda. So the ones that we also have kind of asked you to prepare. And I would like to start with some exogenous factors about gas demand in Europe and also end of long-term contracts. What does that mean? And then we can move one layer deeper, I would say, and come to the topic that is for regulators, but also for, I would say, infrastructure operators, maybe a bit closer. What kind of impacts do those exogenous elements have for the day-to-day business of energy infrastructure and also energy infrastructure regulation? So let me first introduce the panelists. So we have Malcolm Archer from ENSOC, the European Network of Transmission System Operators for Gas. We have Doug Wood from EFET, European Federation of Energy Traders. We have Gert de Blok from CEDEC, so the also European Federation of Local Energy Companies. And we have finally Michael Schmulze from GIE Europe, so Gas Infrastructure Europe. And I think he will have maybe a slightly different focus as Malcolm, maybe more on storage or LNG, as that are also very capital intensive sectors and infrastructure of importance for gas in Europe. So yeah, let's start with Malcolm here about the first question. What is your point of view?
Thank you. So thank you very much for the invite. And so go first again, which is always very nice. Thank you. So we get a PowerPoint forward first. I've tried to, the first point I've got here is gas market, gas demand evolution and long-term contracts. And I split them in two to some extent because, as recently been said, gas market evolution is what we're looking at, the third energy package. Fundamentally, as was stated, all the code should be fully implemented by the end of May. May not be in every member state, but fundamentally everything should be implemented by the end of May, so you consider what next. And what the CEER MMR says is that where the codes are fully implemented, markets are allowed to develop. So what we should be considering, as was stated, is full implementation of the codes. Let's let the markets develop as they are. And what we need to consider to make sure then is what next? What is the issues that need to be addressed? And whether there's significant issues or smaller issues, evolution as it suggests, I would say the market needs to evolve as we see issues arising and to address those issues as they come. Maybe I'll address long-term contracts in a minute. So fundamentally, not the market that we're trying to deliver today to improve. Fundamental change may not be needed. We need to understand what the small changes are to improve. And what we do need to use the words of CEER is dynamic regulation to allow that change to happen, or to have flexibility within the legislation to allow us to adapt the measures to meet the legislation itself. Now, we do know change in European legislation is not an easy task, and it can take some time. But fundamentally, what we need to ensure is the arrangements are in place to allow flexibility to change things or to adapt the arrangements in order to meet future challenges or the challenges as we see them. The big thing, obviously, in the longer term is to how do we develop the arrangements to meet decarbonisation of the energy system. That's a longer term discussion. The shorter, medium term is how do we develop the arrangements to improve the market. One of the issues that may come up is long-term capacity contracts falling away, and then what happens? So we have currently an entry-exit system in order to promote market behaviour, to get liquid markets, to get competition within that. And in order to do that, the providers of the entry-exit system, the TSOs, need to recover their costs in some way. And they recover that currently by charging entry and exit into that particular system. As long-term contracts fall away, we will still have that model, and what we need to understand is whether that model needs to be fundamentally revised or whether it needs to be adapted in some ways in order to change. And because we don't really fundamentally know what the long-term contracts changing and falling away are going to look like, I don't think it's currently the right time to say fundamentally we need to change the entry-exit system model and how TSOs recover their money. Maybe we need to experience problems as they happen. Maybe market liquidity, as was stated, will drop. Once we see these issues, okay, we need to think about how we address them. Maybe we need some pre-think in order to do that, but fundamentally we should consider the entry-exit model and how TSOs recover their costs as a model, and then see whether consider whether those principles need to be fundamentally changed or not. And fundamentally, I don't see currently with the aims of the market and such things need to change too much. Also, as was mentioned, the market is very good at addressing certain elements, trying to achieve the best outcomes for gas delivery. What also maybe it's not so good at is valuing security of supply in the longer term for extreme events. How does the 1 in 20 world look like in a market? It's not covered, but TSO's infrastructure and systems need to match this 1 in 20 world, this system, the longer term security of supply, and need to provide capacity for that. And how does it do that? And how do we do that? And how do we spread some costs is also needs to be covered. So that's my answer to my first question. I could go into the other questions.
Yes, please.
Investment planning has already been discussed to some extent.
Not about the second question, but the long-term contracts. Yeah, you have also kind of addressed.
Yeah, long-term contracts. So that's where I am.
No, then let's move on to Doug, please.
Thanks, and thanks to CEER for organising this. I think it's very important we have these conversations. It's the old.
Can you use the microphone?
Thank you. Just thanks to CEER for organising this. It's the old Einsteinian dictum that if you stay at the level of understanding that when the problem was created, you will never get to a solution. You have to progress beyond that, and you need to be able to have those discussions to get to that stage. One of the advantages we have is the European Federation of Energy Traders is we don't have the word gas in our title, we don't have the word electricity in our title. We have energy in our title, which you'd think gave us an advantage of being able to see both sides. If only it were as easy as that. But we are having many of these discussions internally. I want to make a sort of general point and a more specific point. The general point comes out of several of the introductions which talked about very wide variations in expectations of what gas demand will be in the future. Pedro talked about differences of not knowing what the future gas demand was. Agustin talked about the difference between where we might think we would like to be and where we are likely to end up, and Tom spoke about it as well. And this underpins one of the things we're thinking of throughout, that's affecting market parties throughout, and it's the allocation of uncertainty and risk, and how people deal with this level of uncertainty and risk, particularly in an environment that requires significant investment to go forward. Everyone can see there's an enormous amount of risk attached to those investments, but no one wants to bear it, no one wants to pay for it. And when we talk about where should some of the costs go, it's always someone else should pay, but not me. And the solution around this has got to be thinking about where, how we think forward on where the risk sits and who is best able to deal with it. And this is what markets should do. And we've spoken a lot about markets, but let me just take the opportunity to remind you that sometimes we talk about markets facilitating the answer or the solution, or the market is the answer. Or markets, the important thing is the markets are a process. They're not an answer. There is no one answer. There is no one static, continuous answer. The answer will continuously change as new technologies take place, as different market circumstances evolve, as things change. And the point about the market is not that it facilitates a specific answer, but it enables the movement to go from one answer to the next answer as things change. And it's important to remember that is embedded within the framework that we're talking about. And a perfect example of that is what's happened to long-term contracts for transportation capacity. Because at a very immediate level, there's been a move away from long-term contracts, partly because the cost of transportation is greater than the price differential between the connected hubs. That's a kind of easy thing. But it's a lot more than that. If you are signing up for a 10-year transportation agreement, and people who are sitting in the middle of 10-year transportation agreements at the moment know this very well, is that there have been a substantial amount of changes. And no one really knows how the future costs related to transportation contracts are going to evolve, particularly if we see further flight, further short-term bookings, reduction of gas usage related to specific networks or specific points, and no one wants to be left carrying the can for this.
They see this as a long-term risk. And as long as that's the case, people are not going to renew long-term contracts in transportation capacity, and that will have a similar impact on long-term commitments to supplies to customers or long-term underwriting of investment assets. There is this view of the levels of risk attached to anything beyond the short term at the moment, which we have to find some way to address and appropriately to share those risks. And I just take the opportunity, I could do it now or in the later question, but I take the opportunity to raise a paper that IFET raised at the 2015 October Madrid Forum session, which was trying to begin a discussion around who is in the market to share those risks. That it's not a case of that TSOs can protect themselves from risk by just sticking up tariffs and the shipper bears it all. Bigger shippers will just walk away and stop booking and leave the problem with TSOs. That is not a long-term solution. It has to go beyond that. And in our paper, we started to lay out some of the potential parties who were involved in this, who may have to take some of the risks and some of the costs. And sure, shippers are in there and we're going to have to pick up some of the costs, and we recognise that. TSOs are also in there. The owners, for example, if assets are overvalued, then does the RAP have to take a hit? Do the TSOs have to conduct greater operational improvements and cost savings? To what extent do other stakeholders have to take some of this? The gas consumers have to have a wider direct pickup of some of the costs, or even the broad taxation base, the broad socialisation through taxation, which might happen anyway if your TSO happens to be a state-owned company. And indeed, if there are costs associated with the electricity industry, for example, as Malcolm spoke and has also been mentioned, about the level of security that the gas network provides to the electricity industry, then should that be recognised explicitly? So there's a number of potential parties who are part of this. And I think when we move towards the uncertainties around the evolution of gas demand, what is going to happen to long-term contracts, what's going to happen to the allocation and pricing of that risk, and what's the effects of that, we have to bear in mind what the market can do in order to help do this efficiently, so that people get to own the risks that they're best able to manage, and how we avoid risks being misallocated with additional costs put on the system. That was way more than 5 minutes. I'm sorry.
No, but no problem. Gert?
Well, I'm not going to answer your first question. No, I feel a little claustrophobic when I went through the public consultation paper, in the sense that I'm reading about TSOs and wholesale, and going on some points in very much details, and I feel like I'm an intruder in the discussion taking place here in the gas sector. And I think there are some fundamental changes that are taking place that I do not see reflected in proposals that are here on the table. There's nothing new. We evolved from discussing about markets. We are now confronted with a climate challenge. It's a fundamental difference. Markets and competition can be an instrument, should not be a goal. Secondly, we move from centralized solutions to decentralized solutions. This is the case for electricity. This will more and more be the case also for in the gas sector. And we come from thinking in silos to more integrated solutions. None of these three, I find them back in what is being discussed here. A second big element is the speed. It has been mentioned before, the speed in the energy transition that we need. And then the question is, again, there's a lot of discussion about who should be allowed to do what, especially network operators. What do we do if markets do not deliver? Do we wait if the markets deliver, when the markets deliver? And what do we do if they don't? If they don't do it in a reasonable time frame, if they don't do it under competitive conditions. And then I see that a lot of elements should be reviewed, and then indeed when discussing gas demand, higher or lower, have a bit the feeling of a diagnosis of a life-threatening disease that has been seen, and now we're already discussing about the heritage of the one who's going to be deceased, instead of looking at the potential new technologies that could be developed. And that's something I don't see or feel and what I read on how gas market design should be adapted. I see a lot of continued discussion of topics that were on the table, in the sense what we have done, was this good? Can we make this better? But I see a lot of new elements that are not being addressed for the moment yet. I know the discussion is new, but it's very important, because I guess there will be a review of the gas directive. We cannot say it aloud yet for the moment. Also, the risk is quite high that traditional copy-paste of electricity to gas will also be applied here, which is not necessarily a good solution. And I just take the regulated or non-regulated activities for network operators as an example, and also the example of the storage and the EV charging infrastructure as bad examples that should not necessarily be copied. But some fundamental elements, I, for the moment, to my feeling, are missing, and that's, I can come back later on it, but that's how do you make an integrated approach? It's electricity and gas, but also heating, which then is reflected in technologies that should be linked, market design elements that should be mirrored or could be mirrored, how to tackle flexibility and storage, not only in electricity or only in gas, but with both together from an energy systems approach. Decentralization of gas supply is I don't find it back for the moment yet. And maybe as a last one, the question, how can gas be supported to evolve to decarbonization? Maybe that should be the fundamental question, given we have a climate goals, climate challenge. How do we organize the gas sector in such a way that there's a potential to evolve in the direction of renewable gases, of decarbonized gases? How do we create product families that can be traded? How do we create clarity for consumers, for traders, for investors? And for the moment, I feel that my feeling is that the discussion maybe should be more fundamental than adapting some of the instruments that existed before.
All right, thanks. Michael?
Yes, so thank you also for the invitation, and we currently also are preparing our answers. I think that you have selected the right answers in the discussion. Maybe there are some areas where I miss a little bit the focus, which for me would be the area of how could green gas or hydrogen gas can get a value in the market design. I think that is also an important issue, which needs to be attracted. And from an infrastructure perspective, and I think it covers what Malcolm says, because in GIE we have transmission, but we have also the storage and the LNG operator. I would really underline that whatever the gas demand is, with increasing flexibility and with increasing volatility in the energy production, you see that we need the capacity in big demand days. Let's so-called the Dunkelflaute is a good example, where we need the capacity in the system. So even if the gas demand is reducing, capacity is needed, and I think the only way currently this flexibility can be served, especially in the seasonal sense, is providing it by existing infrastructure we have in the system. I think that's a special focus we are dealing in the gas storage sector, where we see that there is really a value of gas infrastructure in the value chain. Just to bring you one example, We have made a study for Germany, and it's not including the sector coupling part. It's only an evaluation what is the system value and the insurance value of gas storage in the German gas value chain. We have a value of 2 billion euros, which is quite a lot. If you would see this on a European level, then let's say at least 10 million euros. So you see that the quantification of this value is a really important point, and I really want to underline that this big capacity need and the seasonal flexibility should be served by the existing infrastructure we have. And we need in the gas market design also mechanism to value these services, which currently I do not see reflected. We have, but maybe that we can discuss in the network development plan discussion. But maybe one word, because you also raised the question on the long-term contracts. When I look to the storage market situation, we have also some long-term contracts. So part, and I would say the majority of the capacities are sold via auctions on short-term basis, but there are some existing long-term contracts. We have done a study last year with FTI where we have seen that these long-term contracts will expire in 2025 in this area, and then we have a further push into market-oriented prices, and we have no regulation, or in most parts in Europe we have no regulation, and I think that's why it is so important to talk about how the value, the positive externalities can be included in the future gas market design, because we need these flexibilities in these storage assets in 2030. The question is, how do we come to 2030 that we have these flexibilities? Because I think we also agreed that this is the most cost-efficient way to use the existing infrastructure, and I think that's what I like to underline in context of long-term contracts and gas demand, that we really need to meet in big demand situation the already existing flexibility we have.
Okay, thanks. So I would like ask you then to continue indeed on this infrastructure planning and infrastructure needs. I think you gave already a hint that on average demand may go down, but peak remains. So what does that mean then for infrastructure planning and infrastructure needs? TYNDP, is that a good tool, or can this be adapted as well?
I think it's a good tool. We have, I think both NSOC G and NSOE are, I think, in the best place in the TSOs to evaluate the scenarios we need. I think from the GRE perspective, we always want to underline that we need this holistic approach to look on both sectors, but also look on the whole infrastructure. I think this is also a good example when we talk about the storage infrastructure in the network development plans. We see that it is assumed that this infrastructure is there till the next 10 years. I think it's an assumption, but we did also together with NSOC some analysis in the winter outlook, where we have seen if you would reduce the existing storage capacity by 10%, only the storage capacities we have, and then look what happens in specific security of supply scenarios during peak days, then we would see that there are demand curtailments under the current regime. And I think that is something which should also be considered, to include the whole infrastructure, the LNG, the storage infrastructure in this approach. That's, I think, important to have this holistic view on the TRONDP.
Okay, thanks, Gert. You
Yes.
would maybe be in favor of a decentralized infrastructure planning?
No, I think here already we're going certainly in a good direction. We have been pleading now already for a few years of a more intensive involvement of the distribution side, also in the 10-year network development plans. This is valid as well for electricity as for gas. So the good thing is that also with the cooperation between NSOE and NSOC, this is probably one of the most important steps that has been taken on having an integrated approach of how the European energy system should evolve. And then the next one is put the TSOs and the DSOs together in this exercise as the systems are decentralizing. And probably the vision from distribution side is better on what is happening in the local landscape than what the TSO is able to see. Yeah, this then could also come together that there is sort of an update of investment frameworks that shift the focus, so not only from transmission but also more for what investments are needed in the direction of the distribution system operators. But anyway, also something I read in the document, which I found very positive, is the necessity of this coordinated long-term planning to properly address climate change. And I fully agree on that. And also that priority should be given to making best use of existing infrastructure, and this exercise will certainly help.
All right, thanks. Doc?
Thanks. I'd like to start by paying tribute to the TYNDP process. I know it's quite, we always like to complain. We'll continue to complain about it. We want more transparency, more information. But it wasn't that long ago we didn't have anything, and we've gone from, you know, disconnected plans to an integrated plan to common scenarios to removing the duplicates of and all the things we complained about. And the TYNDP process has continued to improve on a year-to-year basis, and it's extremely powerful and important piece of work, and we thank you, but it will continue to get more difficult, I guess, because in future, I agree, the interaction with distribution systems will become more key to this. The interaction between gas and power will become more key. The differences between peak load and average load, because that will have an impact on throughput and revenues, that will become more key. We'll start to have different gas qualities again if we have methane networks, hydrogen networks, blended networks, and whether you're having different distribution systems with different specs and how the TSO manages that. So it's only going to get more complicated, but I'm pleased to say that, you know, I think it's a powerful process, and it's come a long way, and we just need to continue to do this in a very open framework where we can understand what the issues around the scenarios are.
All right, thanks. Malcolm?
It's always nice to move on from a compliment, so thank you very much, Doug. And then Dimitris will take that. I'll pass it on to my colleagues who do the work. So it does take, I mean, the more interaction you have with stakeholders, the more resources, the more points it takes, the more transparency you need to have. There's a couple of things I wanted to say about investment and DSO's involvement. Thank you. Within the EU, there are some member states that need investments to do with security supply market diversification. Baltic region, for instance, you need investments there to bring them up to the standard of the rest of the EU. So some investments in gas, some large investments in gas are still needed. And then the 10-year network development plan has served us well in understanding what is needed in the past, but what has been stated, what we need to think about is what is needed for the future. We've connected the NSOG's 10-year network development plan is about cross-border infrastructure. Now what we need to understand is cross-sector infrastructure with working with our NSOE colleagues, and how that will work in the future, and also how the system looks in the future with a more decarbonised and potentially decentralised gas supply with biogas and biomethane and such. So that is the focus we need to have, and that is being slowly integrated within the processes as we go along. So hopefully that improves. One of the things that was mentioned was increased DSO involvement, and I think that's absolutely right. It needs to happen. I guess it's how. I think there's about 2,500 DSOs in Europe alone. So how do we incorporate that? Is that done on a national basis, and then the TSOs tell us what the DSO has told them, or whether they come to us directly? Of course, we need to understand how that can work and who can be the voice of the DSOs on a European level and interact with us. So I think it's absolutely right. It's just a little bit of the how to not swamp people to understand what is needed there. So I think what the 10-year network development served us very well. there's some investments needed for security of supply purposes. What we need to understand is how it develops in the future, along with the sector coupling approach with NSOE and also the decarbonisation, renewable gases, and how we need to focus on that.
All right, very good. Then a final point, and that's maybe building upon the infrastructure needs, but maybe there are also potential decommissioning when there are new supply routes, for example, that some of the infrastructure might be less used, and what is needed in that case in order to have a proper process for those potential decommissioning. So I'd like to start again with Malcolm. Yeah.
I like the fact you didn't put decommissioning in your question, so I haven't really mentioned decommissioning in my answer. So what I think we need to look at in the future, as was stated by Michael earlier, is to understand, although there may be potential, you see some scenarios looking at a decrease in annual demand, what is the impact on peak demand? And the gas systems and the electricity systems are designed to meet a peak. They're not designed to meet an annual load. They're designed to meet a peak. And what does that peak look like in relation to the annual demand going forward? And therefore, how much capacity is needed, not just on an annual basis, but also what is needed on a peak basis to provide energy and security of supply between the two sectors, as Doug mentioned earlier. So that needs very careful consideration about how that looks like in the future and how the two interact. And also then, if an asset, I mean, what we're looking at currently is the local network. How do you repurpose? How do you utilize networks that are already in the ground and have an asset life left? Can we use them for hydrogen? Can we use them for other purposes? Can we repurpose them to transport energy or CO2, whatever it may be, in order to utilize the assets we have rather than building new assets to transport energy? So I think these are the things that we need to fully consider before we talk about decommissioning and understanding what the system may look like. And when we get into the 2020s, maybe we'll have more certainty on the role of hydrogen, maybe we'll have more certainty on the role of CCS, CCU, and then we can understand how we can repurpose and utilize the assets and look to utilize them fully before even decommissioning becomes a conversation.
All right, very clear. Doug, any views on those?
My first 2 points were identical to Malcolm's. So I guess just put a slightly different angle on it. When I was thinking about the differentiating between reductions in peak and reductions in throughput, it comes back to this: how is peak valued? So and it comes back to the revenue recovery around that, is what people are prepared to pay for as having a sufficient steel in the ground versus other means of managing that, like demand side responses or so on. So there's a financial as well as a physical element in there. The other things I thought of around the question were, and I've mentioned this to one or two people, is I guess we need to start thinking about if we are really likely to get to decommissioning of pipelines, is there a cost involved in that? Do we need something like abandonment and site restoration provisions to lift the pipelines? Can the pipelines be left in the ground, or do we actually need to restore and take them out? And there's a balloon cost at the end of the decommissioning, like you have in upstream for removing rigs from the North Sea. So I think there's something about is there a cost and how do we factor that in? But I refer also to my previous comments about just sticking costs onto shippers for doing that. And similarly, council very carefully against use of things like accelerated depreciation as a way of getting these balloon payments, because we need to be very careful about how the risks and costs are attributed. So let's not jump at supposedly simple solutions. They could have significant unintended effects. So it's definitely ripe for further discussion.
Okay, thanks. Gert?
In fact, I have nothing to add to the two previous ones.
Perfect.
I would say do a copy-paste from transmission to distribution on this one.
All right, very good.
I think we can agree with the panel, and it seems also with the regulators that this is not the topic. If we talk about capacity decrease, I think then we lost everything. I think what we should discuss is what is the value of green gas, how can we best use the existing infrastructure, how can we meet peak demand. So I think that's not the right question. Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
Answer that.
Very good. Then I think, as panelists, we are done with the questions on the agenda. So I would like now to open the floor for questions from the audience. Yeah, we have here a question on the second row. I don't know where the microphone is for the moment. Yeah, we will bring it to you. So please state your name and affiliation, and then.
Yes, so I'm Victor from GRDF, the French gas DSO. And so I'm quite happy to see that everyone agrees that we need a stronger involvement of DSOs into the TYNDP, because there is a strong need to blend together the power-to-gas storages or reverse flow pipes installation. And so I just wanted to bring maybe an answer to the O you raised, Malcolm. My understanding is that in the electricity market design, they have created this EU DSO entity. And so I hope that in the potential gas market design, we could have this EU gas DSO entity, a different one from the EU electricity DSO entity. And I think it would be the best way to involve DSOs through this entity in the TONDP process. I don't know what you think about this.
Yeah, Gert, you're already making an application, maybe?
Well, I think I'm well placed to react on this one. Maybe a first one is on a EU gas DSO entity. As SEDEC, our position was we should have an integrated electricity and gas EU DSO entity, because now we are institutionalizing the silo thinking. For example, the discussion on flexibility. My colleagues from the electricity associations, they refused to discuss about one report on flexibility we need in the energy systems. They wanted a separate report for electricity flexibility, and then the gas sector, okay, then they had to make a report on themselves for the gas flexibility solutions. This is a very nice example of how you risk to institutionalize that sectors are drifting apart instead of being integrated. So for the moment, indeed, probably 10-year network development plan electricity side will in the future probably coordinated, facilitated by a European entity. But even there, the question is, would it maybe not be more sensible in the first phase at the national level to work out a sort of cooperation methodology between TSOs and DSOs at national level, given the number and the diversity of the landscape in the distribution landscape. So that will most probably be the direction chosen in the electricity sector, and you could have a parallel then for gas, but it would be a bit strange. So ENTSO-E and ENTSO work together into one plan, and then below we are going to treat it completely separately with two different entities. That's probably not the most optimal way to treat it.
Okay. Don't know if anybody else want to react or.
I mean, from a purely 10-year network development plan, obviously we want maybe not quite a single voice, but a number of voices from DSOs, not the 2,500, and we do have that with Eurogas and SEDEC and GRU who can provide some DSO voices into there. But fundamentally on the level of decarbonised gases within your network or any network, I mean, maybe that, as you said, should come through on a national basis and then feed up into ourselves. On the EU DSO entity, I mean, I know the electricity entity has a number of obligations in developing codes and other parts, and whether that's needed in gas, because the need for such codes in gas may not be as required. So I don't know whether there's such a need for such an entity within the gas region, but ultimately, as you said, that if they're driving away in certain directions on electricity provisions and we are not getting the gas voice in that region, then maybe something is needed to provide a gas voice for that.
Okay, thanks. A question from...
Thanks. Martin Crouch, a consultant. I'll try and be slightly provocative to try and break down this consensus that is emerging, which I find slightly worrying in the sense that there's a lot we've heard this afternoon about, don't change things until they're broken. We need to take a slightly cautious approach, not from all the panelists, but from some of the panelists and the presentations, that we should Don't jump to pan-European approaches. Let's work out how things are going to play out in the markets and leave space for things to develop. And I just wonder if it feels to me like with the TYNDP, for example, I would agree that's come on a huge way from where it started. But isn't it more a solution to the problems of the 2010s than the 2020s? If we're going forward, we're in a radically different energy sector. We've got a huge challenge from decarbonisation and digitalisation and decentralisation, and we don't seem to be taking that big step change. And I wonder if some of that, and this is the provocative part, is because we're asking people who've got billions of euros of investment sunk in doing things the way they're done today. And can we really expect sector planning, investment planning, reliant on those entities to open up to radical change and departures from existing ways of working that we're going to need if we're going to meet the challenges that face us? I think there's a bit too much vested interests and people. It's quite hard, I think, to break out of that. But I wonder if the panel really believe that we've got the right institutions and the right organisations to deal with the radical change that some people say we really need.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll give the answer to, or the floor to the 3 infrastructure operators at least. Maybe Doug is not that necessary, but let's start with Michael.
I would say that I think that's exactly the challenge for now a discussion on a future gas market design, and that would be also my expectation on the regulatory environment, that the gas package or a legislative framework sets the right incentive and maybe also some obligations that the existing participants could move in this direction, to have more cooperation, to have these sector coupling issues. I think that's possible if you set the right regulatory incentives, if you set the right regulatory framework, that this will move in this direction. And maybe itself it will not happen, but with the right regulatory incentive, and that's the expectation also on a discussion on a new gas package, I would assume that this could promote this.
Malcolm?
I think it's a very fair point. Sitting here as a TSO owner to say do you want to use my system? You don't want to build a new system, you want to build a hydrogen system. I completely understand that. But I guess it goes back to what we're trying to achieve, and whether you can achieve it with the existing infrastructure you have at minimum cost, or whether you need something radically different. I guess what we are saying is, with the aims that we're trying to achieve, which is decarbonisation by 2050, we think you can do it cheaper and quicker with the infrastructure you have now, with gas, with electricity. So we can do it cheaper and quicker that way than doing something completely different. Now, fundamentally, it's therefore someone else who has something completely different idea to challenge that and say, no, I think I can do it quicker and cheaper with this alternative arrangement than you can. So I think we are saying we can do something cheaper, quicker with gas, and we can decarbonise by 2050 using decarbonised gas, hydrogen, or wherever pathways we look at, using existing infrastructure with some disruption, but maybe not massive disruption. I don't know what other solutions are out there challenging that currently, and therefore we could sort of say, well, we think that there's something different to say. Obviously, electricity may have an all-electricity world, or heat networks may have a heat network world. So we need to understand how they all interact in order to do that. But fundamentally, I think I don't see that alternative that you're proposing coming forward with that challenge. So we're saying we can meet the challenge with infrastructure we have. I don't know whether you have any alternatives than that. I guess that's, and I don't know whether anyone in the room has, but... Can
I just say very briefly, I don't dispute that you would have that view, and you may turn out to be right. I'm not sure you should be the judge and jury deciding who's the right outcome, though, and the one holding the pen centrally to develop the investment plans.
But we're not saying that we are the right outcome. We're saying market arrangements need to be right to drive the right behaviour. And if that right behaviour is not a solution that's gas, then maybe that's right. Maybe that's the right way. But I think around the table here, we were saying the framework needs to be put in place to provide the right answer. Maybe not an answer that's gas or electricity or something else. So I don't know I understand that, but me doing a 10-year network development plan, looking at the gas system, is that. But I mean, the market arrangements we weren't saying. I don't think was. Doug, I don't know whether you.
I was just trying to follow through Martin's thing, and sure, there is a way. If you say sustainability and security are the important two criteria in the trilemma, and you forget about affordability, one way of achieving that is to go back to national champions, with states making policy decisions and enforcing specific outcomes. We could go down that route. I kind of remember that's where we were a long, long time ago, with national energy policies and so on. And we've spent certainly 20 plus years getting away from that in gas because we understood, or we knew, that governments are not particularly good at making these decisions efficiently. That they tend to make the wrong decisions, that we end up with gold-plated systems, we end up with inefficient outcomes, and we end up with constrained outcomes that don't evolve as technologies change and things happen in the outside world exogenously. And we've kind of gone into this belief that says, there are some things that the market is good at and there are some things that the market is not good at. And we've learned that the market is not good at telling you what the right level of security is, but if you define the level of security that you want, the market's good at delivering it in an efficient way. And similarly, I understand that says that the market on its own might not deliver the level of decarbonisation that you're trying to achieve, because it kind of depends on consumers willing to pay additional sums for that. And when it comes down to it, they rarely do. But if you define what the policy objectives are, then still a market is still the best means that we have, imperfect though it is, but it's still the best means that we have for actually delivering these kind of outcomes. So yeah, I agree. Markets have their weaknesses, and they don't necessarily deliver these things. But if I support Malcolm questioning what your alternative was. If your alternative is to go for a heavily interventionist approach which delivers directed outcomes, then I would suggest that was infinitely worse.
Okay, maybe not states, but then ACER or NRA's responsibility or oversight of 10-year network development plans and investment decisions.
States would never allow.
Is that because that is also something that we have as a question in our consultation document on the plan, but also on the underlying scenarios and CBA methodologies. Is there enough regulatory oversight? Malcolm, yes, no.
I think if I was Martin, I'd say I'm asking the wrong person to say that. So I mean, I think investment decisions made by TSOs and DSOs are done with regulatory oversight in general, and therefore we don't make investments unless they are approved by our regulators. And now we have a market-driven investment now with incremental process, but ultimately it has a significant amount of NRA intervention within that. We don't make these decisions on our own. We make the decisions in coordination. And obviously we have a significant amount of consultation in order to discuss how we go about these investments. So, our regulatory review, everything is geared towards how much money we get and how much money we invest. So I think there is NRA. Now, whether the NRAs are effective, well, that's for the NRAs to say how effective they could or should be. But fundamentally, I think as TSOs, we see regulatory oversight to be a significant for our investment and our revenues and everything that we do.
Okay. Michael, yeah?
Yeah, maybe one element which I think needs to be further developed when we talk about regulatory oversight and who approves it, I think, is this cross-sectoral view. Because currently, it's done in the gas sector, it's done in the electricity sector, and I think that's the challenge, how this can be brought together. It's on the NSOC and on the TSO side, but it's also necessary to combine these on the side of the regulatory oversight, and I think that's a big challenge where I see it has to have this holistic view which I mentioned before.
Good. Gert?
Well, that's an advantage that exists in a lot of places on the distribution side, as a lot of distribution companies, have electricity and gas and fall under regulatory oversight of national regulators. So that would be only one point, that on the question of NRAs and or ACER on 10-year network development plans, as far as distribution is concerned, it would be absolutely necessary to have NRAs very closely involved and not only Acer, given the lack of know-how that exists in Acer on distribution, also given the diversity of the landscapes in the member states.
Okay, very good. I can make the same remark as Doug did in the beginning. Also in our name, we do not have gas, it's energy regulators. So all energy regulators in Europe do also regulate gas and electricity. So that's a good element. No, any other question from the audience on the topics that we have discussed in this second panel? Yeah, Steve.
Thank you. Steve Rose from RWE. I just wanted to pick up on the point about the 10-year network development plan and the PCI process. I think I would sort of go along with a lot of what Malcolm has said about the improvements in the TYNDP, but I think there are issues around the link between the PCI and the TYNDP, because I'm sure the fact that you have to effectively get yourself into the TYNDP in order to get PCI status and therefore potentially get some subsidy for your project is something which is probably not the most efficient process, and I think perhaps to some extent compromises both the TYNDP and the PCI itself. So I haven't got a solution, but I think maybe going forward, if we're looking at possible mechanisms for granting subsidy or granting some sort of hallowed status for renewable gas projects or for power to gas projects, I think we shouldn't use the PCI in the 10-year network development process as they stand at the moment as a sort of template which we just cut and paste across. I think there does need probably to be some element of linkage, but I think maybe the process of awarding the subsidy or awarding the status for accelerated development or supported development should be perhaps a bit more competitive and a bit more joined up than it seems to be at the moment.
Okay, Malcolm?
Well, I guess, the process is about collating information on who wants to develop what in the EU that has a cross-border context. And ultimately, it's the first step into saying if you want to develop something on a cross-border context, this is what you need to do in order to start the process for a PCI. Now, whether it's the right way, this is a question. As you say, I wouldn't have a different process. Is there a different process for collecting those projects? I wouldn't know. Whether there's anything better currently than what we have for the PCI process, initiating that. On how to look at projects in the future, what the 10-year network development CBCA analysis and such looks at is a cost-benefit analysis about security supply, some externalities, and how you cost those externalities is difficult, but looking at some externalities, and to understand whether the infrastructure has some benefits, societal benefits, and therefore whether it should go ahead. I guess maybe what needs to be developed further and what we need to understand is how you put sustainability into the 10-year network development plan, how you look at sustainability in the future and how those projects are assessed. P2G is not a cross-border project as such, and therefore how is included within this context needs to be fully considered. And I don't know what the answer is, as you say, but I think we need to consider that a bit more fully about how you include such projects that help decarbonisation but are not currently sort of fit into the context of a cross-border mechanism, how you fulfill that in the future, I don't know, but maybe we need to look at that a bit more.
All right. And maybe another provocative question then, because you do not seem to want to talk about decommissioning, but if there are cross-border effects of potential decommissioning, does the current process for investments can also be copied for the other way around, so for the decommissioning then?
But I guess if you have a look, it's about what capacity needs are needed in the EU in the future, and whether that's capacity new or future capacity needs, and whether you therefore need to decrease capacity. I guess you could consider the process could be something used to understand what the future capacity is on a reduced basis as well as an increased basis.
All right, very good. Any other questions for this panel? No, that does not seem to be the case. So thank you very much, all of you, for and. So I think we have come to almost the end of this workshop. I think it was very interesting to hear a lot of different views, but also a lot of common views at least. Let's see what are the particular answers to the particular questions. I've noted down a few elements where I see that there was a lot of agreement. I heard a lot of times markets. People do believe a lot in power of markets to deliver, at least when the policy objectives are set. Sometimes market is not an objective in itself, as it was said. It is a tool and can also help us evolving from one state where we are to the changes that we want to achieve into another stage. So this future gas package, and that will also be seen, because that's also what we are all working about, is something that will depend largely on the new Commission, and as long, and also the scope, whether it will be limited, some tweaks, or if it will be more substantive. That will not be known, I would say, before the new Commission will be established. About some of the topics that we also mentioned in our paper, it's not about contestable activities, maybe more commercial versus regulated, and here as well the market needs to be given the priority to deliver first. If that's not the case, then regulated entities are apparently ready to step in. So that's also nice to know. If we see this sector coupling, and I think that's also a subject that came around a few times, that currently we are with ENTSO-G sitting next to ENTSO-E. They are talking to each other. They are preparing joint scenarios. TYNDP has seen very nice improvement from where it started. So that's positive. There are still some areas for improvement. It might be used in a different form also for decommissioning purposes. It can also be improved, let's say, for more these projects of common interest where the sustainability element is also not always the same as a cross-border element. So I think there are a lot of elements that we have noted, and as Marcus said in the beginning, we will draft a summary of today's workshop, which we will also reflect upon internally, and not the least in order to be able to report back to the Madrid Forum in June, specifically on the two questions that we were asked. But as you have seen from today's debate, the discussion goes a little bit broader than just the two questions about this contestable activities or regulated activities, and also the investment question. So we have a lot of things to reflect upon, and we are most of all looking forward to the answers to our consultation. As Marcus has said, you do not need to answer all of the 18 questions, but you can also choose the ones where you feel most, which are most relevant for your organization, and then just answer those ones. So in order then to conclude and to sum up today's discussion, I would like to thank you very much for having attended today's workshop. Also the people who attended via the web stream. I hope it was you could have learned something. You could have contributed to the debate, and we will keep in touch, I would say, via this consultation, but also a lot of other things which are going on within CEER. We are preparing also jointly with Acer maybe a successive document to the people who still remember the Bridge 2025 paper. So this is also something that we are currently working on, in order to give enough input to the new Commission when they will develop the energy policy further, and especially what is the general expectation, at least also with an important element for the gas sector. So thank you all for coming, and I wish you a good trip back home. Thank you.